everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. Happy Monday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us here on ABC News Live. Well, new subpoenas and more whistleblowers. That's how we start the second week of House Democrats' impeachment inquiry into President Trump. We have the latest on that coming up. Plus, actress Laverne Cox is here in the briefing room to talk about a big splash she made on the red carpet at the Emmys this year over a major Supreme Court case this week with implications for 11 million Americans. Stay tuned for that conversation. But first, President Trump's abrupt decision to withdraw American troops, dozens of American troops from northern Syria on the front lines, with Turkey effectively abandoning U.S.-backed Kurdish rebels up there who have been fighting ISIS. It has sent Washington into a tailspin. It is drawing protests from top Republicans. Here's the president's tweet earlier this morning announcing the move. Among other things, the president says it's time for us to get out of these ridiculous, endless wars, many of them tribal. He says we'll fight where it is to our benefit and only fight to win. He basically says that the crisis in Turkey, Syria, from Iran, Iraq, Russia, is now up to the others to figure out. He says what they can figure out what to do about that, and also what to do with those captured ISIS fighters in the region. A senior U.S. official this morning told our Martha Raddatz that, quote, everyone in the military, from the youngest Green Beret in Syria to the Secretary of Defense, is opposed to withdrawing U.S. forces. And even the president's critics up on Capitol Hill, some of his staunchest defenders, just this afternoon now breaking ranks with the president to issue some pretty extraordinary statements. Take a look at this from Republican leader Mitch McConnell. It's not every day you see Mitch McConnell breaking with the president. Here he says, I urge the president to exercise American leadership, keep together our multinational coalition to defeat ISIS and prevent significant conflict between our NATO ally Turkey and our counterterrorism partners. As we learned the hard way, McConnell says, during the Obama administration, American interests are best served by American leadership, not by retreat or withdrawal. And then there was this from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, the president's sidekick, if you will, in this impeachment fight, one of his most outspoken defenders, attacking the president for this decision over Syria, saying no matter what President Trump is saying about the decision, it's exactly what President Obama did in Iraq, with even more disastrous consequences for our national security. Simply striking to see Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell compare President Trump to President Obama here. The president does have one defender, however. Rand Paul of Kentucky says, I stand with President Trump today as he once again fulfills his promises to stop our endless wars and have a true America first foreign policy. Our chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, has covered the war in Syria extensively and caught up with us a few minutes ago to explain why there is so much at stake here.
Yeah, hi there, Devin. Look, this is going to be seen as a major betrayal. In fact, a spokesman for the Kurds has already described this as a stab in the back. The Kurds are the ones who've done the fighting, the dying, the sacrificing, the suffering. They've seen their cities, their towns razed to the ground. They've lost many people, their sons and daughters, because women are a key part of the fighting forces in that part of the country as well, and they will see this as a significant betrayal. They were encouraged to pull away from those border positions by the United States because Turkey wanted them to pull back. Turkey did not want them on the other side of the border because it regards them as terrorist forces, in particular the YPG. And so an agreement in exchange for that, then they said, OK, we'll let American forces go and stand on that border instead. And then within a matter of weeks, we now see that American forces have already pulled back, about 150 or so. So the key question is what happens if and when Turkey crosses that border. President Erdogan has threatened this before, but he's also crossed over that border to fight against the Kurds in an area known as Afrin before now, so it's reasonable to expect that he will want to do so again. And the question's already been raised. Will there be anyone left to guard the ISIS prisoners, the ISIS women and children, tens of thousands of them who are being held in camps there? The Kurds have certainly implied that they will not stand as prison guards while they're being invaded. Instead, they'll send their troops up to that border. It also sends a much wider message, firstly to America's allies in the region, Saudi Arabia and also to Israel, and also a message to America's foes, to Iran and Russia, about American intent and how willing America is to stand up for the things that it says it's going to fight for. Now, as far as we understand it, this decision that's been taken by President Trump is against the advice of senior commanders, also against the advice of the State Department. It will send a message across the region, and it could have catastrophic consequences for the people on the ground. Devin?
All right, thanks, Dean. Let's bring in our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, who actually just spoke on the phone with the senior commander of those U.S. allied Kurdish forces in the region. Louis, great to have your reporting here. This commander says he feels abandoned by the United States, which has fought alongside the Kurds in Syria against ISIS for years.
No, you're exactly right, Devin. I spoke with General Mazul Abid. He is the top commander of Syrian Kurdish forces inside Syria. As you said, he feels that the United States is abandoning his forces. He feels that President Trump has made the wrong decision. He says we're leaving us right in the middle of a fight against ISIS. Now, let's not forget, ISIS has been defeated territorially inside of Syria, but at the same time, there are remnants inside that country that continue to act out in terms of violent acts. And we have these thousands of detainees, ISIS family members, hardened ISIS members who are being held in camps that are guarded by the Syrian Democratic Forces, this general's forces. He expressed to me concerns that maybe these guards who are guarding these facilities in southern Syria may have to move up to the north to defend their homeland. And his concern is that what happens next? You know, you may unleash these ticking time bombs, as he calls them, these ISIS fighters, moving back and becoming a resurgent ISIS force, not only inside Syria and Iraq, but elsewhere around the world. He also told me that it's going to be hard to reestablish a credible relationship with the United States right now based on what he's seen with this situation.
A blow to credibility with the United States, but also real concern there about ISIS. 10 to 11,000 fighters in those prisons, as you've reported, Louis, potentially at risk of getting released. ISIS has not been defeated just yet. Louis Martinez at the Pentagon. Thank you so much, Louis. To the battle over impeachment now, as House Democrats begin this week unleashing a flurry of new subpoenas, as we learn now about a second whistleblower familiar with that call that President Trump had with Ukraine's president back in July, coming forward now to Congress. Catherine Faulders is here. She is our investigative reporter who's been covering this from the start. Catherine, this latest round of subpoenas is aimed at trying to get to the bottom of why President Trump abruptly cut off aid to the Ukraine just before that call.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a significant portion of this, to see if that's correlated in any way. Was there a quid pro quo? So you've seen the latest round of them to OMB and to the Pentagon. And now we're not quite sure if they will cooperate. We know that the White House plans on stonewalling a lot of these requests, but it's just the latest. And I think it's important to note just how quickly this is escalating. You know that they, last week, it wasn't a subpoena, but it was a request for documents to Vice President Pence.
In the State Department?
In the State Department, the president's personal lawyer, the White House, all of these coming, you know, on Friday and in the later days of last week. So it shows just how quickly they're moving here.
They're moving quickly. The White House not giving any commitments yet on whether they'll comply with this. Democrats threatening perhaps to put this into their case for impeachment. This all comes, Catherine, as we've learned now, about a second whistleblower that came forward, first reported by ABC News. What do we know about this person? How significant
Right, that's right. George Stephanopoulos broke that yesterday on the show. I think it's significant, Devin, because what the attorneys for this whistleblower say is they say that they have multiple whistleblowers, but that this person has firsthand information. You see the graphic up there. He's already been interviewed by the Inspector General. Of course, he's has the full protection of the whistleblower law, and he's also a member of the intelligence community, we've learned. The particular he or she, that whistleblower. What's significant here is the direct knowledge that this person has. Now, the first whistleblower also had some direct knowledge. The IG said that in a later statement, but I think it raises more questions. The White House says they released a statement saying that the president, he's already released the transcript of the call. Now, what's important is that's their version of the transcript. I think a person with direct knowledge perhaps means they have direct knowledge of the call, and if there was more to the call.
And finally, I just want to ask you quickly, because the president's defenders on Capitol Hill have been saying the president was just joking when he was demanding demanding China help investigate his political rival. What's the White House saying about this? We've been asking them.
We've asked them multiple times, and it's significant that they've been silent. The White House can't say whether the president was joking or not. And frankly, we haven't heard anyone inside the White House say he was joking. It's just his defenders who are going on television saying this. Now, I know he's going to speak soon, so perhaps he'll be asked that question.
Keep our eye on that. Catherine Faulders, thank you so much. The country is obviously very divided over these impeachment proceedings. Our friends at 538 have started an impeachment tracker taking a look at public opinion. Here's the latest at this hour. Here on October 7th, as we begin the second week of impeachment, about 79% of Democrats, not surprising, support this impeachment inquiry. But look at this number of independents. This is significant. This number has climbed significantly over the past couple of weeks, now about 40%, according to the averages from our friends at 538. So how is this playing in the middle of the country? What is this going to mean for the president in regions he needs to win ahead of 2020? We're joined now by Mayor Michael Taylor of Sterling Heights, Michigan, up in Macomb County, just outside Detroit. Mayor, it's great to see you. We, of course, visited with you and visited with your constituents back around the Democratic debate. And had some conversations about these issues. Wanted to get your take, first of all, if you, to the extent you can speak for your community, how closely are people following this controversy over the president in Ukraine?
Sure. Hi, Devin, and it's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me. You know, it's hard to say. I think the community is really not too focused on it right now, and my sense is that it's just a lot of white noise. So it remains to be seen how it's going to play out and whether there's going to be impeachment hearings and whether there's going to be a conviction. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen yet. But I've really had the opportunity over the last week to be out in the community. We had community events on Thursday night, Friday. On Sunday, there was a huge community event, and nobody's talking about it. People are really concerned about the recycling centers, and they're concerned about what's going on in their neighborhoods. There's just not a whole lot of chatter about it, to be honest. So I think everybody has an opinion about it. And if I had to say, I've talked to only a few people, and it's kind of like, this is it. What did he do? It's no big deal. So I don't know. From what I've gathered, being out in the community, it doesn't seem to be having a huge impact. Not yet, at least.
A lot of your constituents that we spoke with when we were there a few weeks ago talking about a different controversy at the time, the president's attacks on those women of color, a Democratic congressman sort of chalked it up to this is just who he is. It's not something we support, but just, it's maybe unsavory, but we don't like it. This sort of, what you're saying is this sort of maybe fits in that same vein, that people willing to excuse this just because it's who he is?
I don't know that they're necessarily saying we're going to excuse this because it's who he is. I think part of the problem from my perspective is that there is so much what I call white noise. As soon as there's a credible, as soon as President Trump does something that most people would say, okay, that this wouldn't be right, he goes right on the attack. And maybe they're conspiracy theories, maybe there's something to it, but the population I hear saying things like, well, maybe what the Bidens did is bad too. So maybe President Trump is just doing what everybody's done. And it gets so muddled up with all this white noise that people don't know what to believe. So I think they are chalking it up like, well, it's just another one of President Trump's so-called scandals. He's going to come out on the attack. And it's kind of baked in at this point. So unless there's something really significant that comes out of these impeachment hearings, like Republican senators banding together and coming up with a conviction, I really don't see this as having a huge impact in Sterling Heights, Macomb County, and frankly, the state of Michigan.
And do you think, Mr. Mayor, finally, I mean, you supported the president in 2016. You told us when we visited that you were sort of reconsidering that support now. Do you personally think that an impeachment inquiry is a good way to go?
Well, there's two responses to this. I mean, the political response is I don't think it's good for the country. But frankly, I read the transcript and it seems pretty clear to me that he was applying pressure and he was doing it for political reasons. I mean, I don't think that any serious person could claim that President Trump would have asked Ukraine to investigate the Bidens if Joe Biden wasn't one of his main political rivals. So to me, the office of president is very important in this country. It's very important in our democracy. And I hate to see it being used in a way to go after rivals. And so I would say personally, I don't like that at all.
Mayor Michael Taylor of the great city of Sterling Heights in Macomb County, Michigan. It's great to see you, sir. Thank you so much for coming in. Hope to have you back. Back here now in Washington, up on Capitol Hill, not far, steps from the Capitol, the Supreme Court today opened its new term, and it is set to be a blockbuster. Take a look today at the number of issues, hot-button issues, on the docket before the justices. As they gavelled in their new term today, they're preparing to take on a series of major cases, much more contentious than anything we've seen in the last couple of years, including cases on LGBT employment discrimination, of course, DACA, the protections for those dreamers, young undocumented immigrants, set in place by President Obama, canceled by President Trump. Gun rights, the first case in 10 years will be heard this year. Abortion, told you about that last week, taking up that Louisiana law. We're going to hear cases on life without parole for juveniles. Is that constitutional? The Bridgegate scandal involving former Governor Chris Christie will come before the Supreme Court as well. And then there is a fascinating case out of Montana involving religious private schools and whether they can get grant money from state taxpayers. A full docket there today. It was great to be in the courtroom, see Ruth Bader Ginsburg fire off that first question. She's looking in good form. We should note that Justice Clarence Thomas was missing today from the bench. He is out because of an undisclosed illness, but those justices are plowing ahead. One of the cases that they will take tomorrow is the biggest of the term. It involves employment discrimination against gay and transgender Americans fired because of who they are. Actress and transgender advocate Laverne Cox and ACLU attorney Chase Strangio stopped by the briefing room last week to explain why this is a case that you're going to want to follow. Laverne Cox and Chase Strangio, thank you so much for joining us in the briefing room. You two have teamed up to raise awareness about this case, and boy, you made a splash at the Emmys. Let's show everybody those pictures of you guys on the red carpet. We took notice of that purse. Laverne, tell us about it and what message you were trying to send there.
Well, this is probably the most consequential case for LGBTQ plus rights, civil rights that the Supreme Court will hear in my lifetime. And no one was talking about the case, and I was like, what can I do? And I was blessed enough to be nominated for an Emmy this year, and I said we could maybe use this Emmy platform to help raise awareness about this case. And thus, the purse, designed by Edie Parker, with October 8th, Title VII, Supreme Court.
Let's put up for everybody what the law is right now. It's called Title VII. It was on your purse, Laverne, and that is a section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this is what it actually says. It says it's against the law in this country to fail or refuse to hire someone or fire someone or otherwise discriminate against them on the basis of a number of categories, including a person's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And the argument that you make here, Laverne, is that sex should cover gender identity. It should cover sexual orientation.
Well, if you discriminate against a trans person because they're transgender, that is de facto discrimination on the basis of sex. And basically, the assumption is that someone assigned male at birth, a transgender person like me, should present in a very specific way. And assuming that someone should present in a specific way is de facto sex discrimination based on sex stereotypes, which is a Pricewaterhouse versus Hopkins Supreme Court precedent that Chase could tell you more about than I can.
But I also was hoping both of you could talk a little bit about some of the characters in this case, the courageous Americans who brought forward these charges of discrimination, one of which is Amy Stevens. She was a longtime funeral home director and embalmer in Michigan. She had been working for RG and GR Harris Funeral Homes for about 6 years. And back, I think it was 2013, she sent a letter to her boss. She said she was actually Anthony Stevens at the time, and starting on Monday, she'd be coming to work as Amy Stevens, and that set off a chain of events in which she was fired. What do you make of her story, and how courageous was it for her to basically tell it to us?
You know, it's incredibly humiliating and degrading when you've been doing a job for a long time and are successful at it, to be fired when you're just saying who you are, and that's what happened here. And she has now spent 6 years defending her rights in court, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which takes a lot out of you. So she really is someone who is paving the way for all transgender people.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy, for being this courageous.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And Laverne, a lot of people are aware of the discrimination the trans community faces in this country. Have you ever faced discrimination in the workplace for who you are? Tell us about your experience.
I've overtly, back in the day, was discriminated against in healthcare, very specifically. I had to sue a hospital. I don't talk a lot about that, but I had to sue a hospital here in New York City because I was denied care because I'm trans. So employment discrimination is a really big deal. And what we're talking about, too, when our government sanctions discrimination against us is giving everyone in the country permission to also discriminate against us.
I just want to get your response to the arguments on the other side. All three employers in these cases before the Supreme Court deny that they actually discriminated against these people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. They say this was about other things, misconduct in the workplace. In the case of Amy Stevens, they say it was about the dress code. Here's what Attorney John Bursch told us. He says the funeral home owner testified that if Stevens had wanted to dress in a different fashion, not on company time, that would have been perfectly fine. But as long as anybody was at work, and it applied to all employees, male or female, they have to follow the company's dress code that has been in place for decades, and the lawyer says that's based on your biological sex. They wanted Amy Stevens to dress as a man, and they say that was the policy. What do you say to that?
I think in Amy Stevens' case, we're seeing a host of sort of anti-trans rhetoric masquerading as sort of justifications around the dress code. But at core, this is a question about whether or not the law that has covered us for many years should be rolled back to allow discrimination against us. And so I think it's really important that people understand that the lower court wholly rejected that argument. And what is before the court is whether it's lawful to fire someone for being transgender, full stop.
But what will it mean for the LGBT community if, in fact, the court does come out and say, you know what, these firings were all wrong, sexual orientation and gender identity are protected under the law?
It would be an incredible victory for us. It would be consistent, as Chase has mentioned, with decisions made in lower courts, and it'll affirm that in the United States of America, it should not be legal to fire someone simply for being who they are. We cannot live in a country that says it's okay to fire you just because of who you are. That is just blatantly wrong and just not the America that I want to live in.
All right, we thank you both. Hope to see you down here later this week. Laverne Cox, Chase Strangio, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's not just transgender Americans with employment protections on the line here. Gay and lesbian Americans have a stake in this case as well. There are two other cases that will be heard by the Supreme Court on Tuesday. One of them involves the story of Gerald Bostock, a former child welfare services coordinator in Clayton County, Georgia. He had been in that job for 10 years until his employer, he says, found out he was gay, and then he lost his job.
So I advocated for child abuse and neglect victims that came through the juvenile court system. And my program had not only state recognition, but also had national recognition. And everything was going along amazingly. And then one day I decided to join a gay recreational softball league. And that's the moment that my life started to change. Within months of that decision, there were negative comments about my sexual orientation. There were disparaging comments about the fact I was participating in a gay softball league.
These are people at your work?
Yes.
Wow.
And there were also comments that I was promoting a county program within the gay community of Atlanta. Within weeks of that, I was fired. I was fired for being gay.
What was it like in that moment when you connected the dots that you said, my gosh, I'm losing my job and this is why? I mean, how'd you feel?
I was devastated. Imagine having a job you loved and that you were great at and successful at, and having that taken away from you. I lost my source of income, my livelihood. I even lost my medical insurance at a time that I was battling prostate cancer. I was totally shocked. I was totally devastated. I didn't do anything wrong, and I didn't do anything differently from the time before I had joined the softball league to the time after I joined.
Did you ever talk to any of your bosses at work? Did you try to explain yourself? Did you have conversations and say, hey, this isn't right? I mean, walk us through what that challenge was like for you as you tried to fight back.
I didn't really have that opportunity.
You didn't?
The day of my firing, I was called down to the court administrator's office and promptly handed my termination papers.
What's life been like for you, Gerald, since you lost your job?
It's been difficult. I've lost contact with friends and colleagues that I worked side by side with, and for many, many years, I had to sell my home within Clayton County and move. So I've moved now into Atlanta. Again, having lost my source of income, I had to find work. I couldn't even get an interview within the child welfare industry, much less a job offer. So I was a period of time without income. I was looking for work. I was still battling.
You working now?
I am working now.
Good.
I'm a mental health counselor at a local hospital in Atlanta.
Fantastic.
But I was still in recovery from prostate cancer, which the stress alone prolonged my recovery period. This has been a devastating, horrible experience.
When you go before the Supreme Court on Tuesday, and your case is one of 3 big cases, as you know, what do you want the justices to know about your story? What do you want them to do?
I want them to know that no one in this country that's willing and able to work should go to work fearful of losing their job because of who they are, how they identify, or who they love.
Perhaps they say, we agree with you 100%, Gerald, but the law as it's written now simply doesn't cover it. Congress needs to write this into the law to make it right, and they don't side with you. What will that mean?
Well, I'm not an attorney, but what I'll tell you is I'm hopeful and optimistic here, because what it will tell me when we get a favorable ruling is that I'll get to go back to the 11th Circuit in Georgia and get my day in court. That's all I've wanted from this, is to have the truth be exposed.
You are stepping up for 11 million gay, lesbians, transgender Americans who face discrimination every day. What's your message to people on the job right now who may be facing discrimination from their employer, may be fearful they're going to get fired for exposing their true selves?
What I say to them is, I'm not only fighting for myself, but I'm fighting for you too. And we're going to make this right. I did beat cancer. I'm now a cancer survivor, and I can beat this too.
Thanks to Gerald Bostock for that interview. We'll have much more coverage on tomorrow's major cases before the Supreme Court. Special coverage here in the briefing room from the court, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We also have a conversation with Amy Stevens, the transgender woman from Michigan, who is the lead plaintiff in that employment discrimination case from the Harris Funeral Homes. We will hear from her in her powerful story, also the attorney in that case as well. Hope you join me then from the steps of the court. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you right back here tomorrow in the briefing room.